Captain America: The First Avenger really reminds me of how much the MCU took so much time to make these characters really memorable before the Avengers came out in 2012. And for me personally, the fact that they had this amount of time to make four movies, mainly to give us the introduction of these characters, excluding Iron Man 2, I gotta say, people just don't usually take inspiration from Marvel when it comes to planning the movies ahead of time before filming. While I don't consider this the best introduction compared to the other MCU characters, I consider this probably my favorite movie when it comes to the first phase. Granted, it's not on par with the next entry that I'm going to be reviewing soon, but on the other hand, Captain America: The First Avenger really proves that the MCU always has a plan way ahead of time before they get to the main event of Phase 1. Steve Rogers, played by Chris Evans in this movie, really sums up of how much I grew to his character after watching the Avengers movies and Civil War. The fact that we can actually see his introduction that took place in the 1940s compared to the other movies that took place in the modern time in Phase 1, I consider that this movie taking place way before Captain Marvel or any of the events happen is probably the better choice to show that Captain America was truly the first Avenger before all the other Avengers became a thing. In the beginning, we get to see that Steve is trying to fit in the military, but unfortunately, due to his size and somewhat low capabilities, he wasn't able to be part of World War II's military. For someone who's in this situation while trying to be with so many people to save the country, this was around the time where Steve was in a different place compared to other characters. And I gotta say, this really shows of how much Captain America: The First Avenger is one of my favorites. We get to see the development of Steve Rogers much more differently compared to other characters like Tony Stark and Thor. During the 1940s, technology, despite with the lab that I'm gonna get to eventually, it really isn't as advanced compared to what Tony had when he had all the technology to make Iron Man come to life. So every time I think about this movie, I instantly think of what the route Captain America would have taken if he actually stayed in this decade compared to him being frozen in ice for the next 70 years to meet up with the other characters. I'm just staying because there are so many opportunities that you can actually do when it comes to Captain America in the 1940s, but I gotta say, this movie tries a little too hard to make the pacing a lot more accurate, even with the 2-hour mark it has when it comes to Steve Rogers' life when he had a date that he wasn't able to do, and considering that he went through 70 years into ice and then come to a present time where technology has improved and most of the people that he met and known of are dead, his life was a lot more complex compared to other characters that we've witnessed in Phase 1. But I really admit that if we actually had a Captain America sequel after the events of this movie, which isn't where he got frozen in the block of ice for 70 years, we wouldn't be able to see him in the Avengers. So I'm pretty sure that the Avengers will probably be a lot more different compared to having one character being left out. So if there's one thing they could give this movie credit, is mostly the characters. Dr. Abraham, the person who made Captain America really strong thanks to his experiment, is a really good character that is mostly responsible for how Captain America became a major Avenger in the first phase up until the final phase. Granted, he ends up being killed by one of the antagonists, but if he didn't and this script took a different route like I mentioned before, he would have done a lot more to give Steve Rogers more motivation. But let's be real, if this happened in the modern times, then I'm pretty sure that this won't even fit with the setting of Captain America. Peggy Carter as Steve's love interest in this movie, I have to admit, when I heard about her at the end of Avengers Endgame, well, she finally had that dance with Captain America, not to mention that it was something that we've been waiting until the release of this movie. She really does a lot more when it comes to her contributing factors in this entire movie. Since I've watched Endgame before this movie, I had mixed opinions towards Captain America's development when it comes to the other characters, mainly from this movie. And I gotta say, for how much that they built up the relationship for the majority of this film, and then this leads to Captain America being frozen for about 70 years, not be able to have that date with Peggy, it really hurts a lot to actually see him deal with the emotional turmoil once he wakes up in New York City in the present day of Phase 1. All I can say is that without Peggy in this movie, then Captain America wouldn't have any issue to stay in the present day with the other Avengers. Because without Peggy, then I'm pretty sure that we're not going to be able to have that great ending of his in Avengers Endgame. Let me just say right now, I really appreciate the characters from nearly everything of their qualities from Captain America the First Avenger. Granted, when it comes to the Winter Soldier and Civil War, despite with those having characters from other franchises, I still think that the First Avenger really does a great job when it comes to character development. As for the Red Skull being the main antagonist in this movie, he is really underrated. The fact that he wants to use the Tesseract to become much more powerful really shows of how much the stones in this franchise can be extremely dangerous. I know full well what the Purple Stone can do once we get into Guardians of the Galaxy, but just by seeing the Tesseract in this film, the Tesseract is really unstable the more I watch bits and pieces of it. And if the Red Skull managed to go through 70 years into the future just like Captain America went through instead of dying, I'm pretty sure his presence in the later films will probably be just like Loki, except that he doesn't turn 100% good and just remains bad for the rest of time. Granted, we get to see cameos from him from Infinity War and Endgame, but at the same time, I actually expected a lot more when it comes to returning villains. Granted, not every other movie needs the same villain in order to make things more interesting because it would easily be repetitive. But this movie really made me appreciate everything, especially the details when it comes to Tony's father is the one that made the Captain America shield, along with some of the elements that I might find out in the later films. I gotta say right now that after watching this movie, which was after the movies I watched before I got to this one, the Captain America the First Avenger really did a lot more, and I gotta say, the earlier years of having Marvel Studios was always a work in progress. It needed to start somewhere with its characters, the development, and even the action scenes. I will say that the action scenes are much more entertaining the more I give it credit for, but I can still prefer the other action scenes because it's mostly improvements. I gotta say, the more you look at the sequels, the more you completely see of how much they did when it comes to the action scenes compared to the first movie. Then again, this was all in 2011 while Marvel Studios are still finishing up the first phase of the Infinity Saga. And this was around the time where Edward Norton refuses to play the Hulk again and they had to find a different actor for the Avengers movie coming up. This movie honestly feels a lot more different compared to what it was in 2011 than in the present day, but I guess that after 10 long years, this movie has somewhat aged normally like everyone else. It needed to start somewhere and it led to great movies like Winter Soldier and Civil War. But then again, I'm gonna get to those movies once I get into Phase 2 and 3. But as for this movie being the first Captain America movie for this saga, it's a good movie. Granted, later entries will be superior, but for me personally, you really shouldn't miss out on what this movie did for the character development of Steve Rogers, in other words, Captain America himself. And with the conclusion of this film that leads to The Avengers, I am looking forward to review that movie being the next movie I need to review as part of Phase 1. But as for this movie, I give it a 7 out of 10.
Let's get this started again, again. Me and my whole crew, we live with no rules.